The town of Sweetstone was a blister on the height of Wyoming. It existed for two reasons: cattle and desperation, the dust, a fine alkali powder, never settled. It coated the warped boards of the general store, the dead eyes of the men leaning outside the land office, and the raw, unpainted clapboard of the broken Tine saloon. Today, it coated the shame of a dozen men and half a dozen women. The year was 1877. The air was dry and hot, smelling of sagebrush, cheap rye whiskey, and the metallic tang of sweat. Outside the broken Tine, a platform had been erected. It was just 3 planks laid across 2 barrels, but it was a stage. A man named Sweeney, who had a face like a wet saddlebag and a voice oiled with false charm, was conducting the day's business, a bride auction. This was not a slave market, Sweeney was careful to explain. Not like the South, God forbid. This was an arrangement of contracts. These women, brought west by a freight company that had gone bust, were merely paying off their passage. They were here of their own free will, seeking husbands, seeking protection in a hard land. The lie was as thin as the dresses they wore. The crowd was thick: ranch hands, prospectors, a few sullen merchants, and drifters who had nothing to bid but enjoyed the sport. They were loud, their jokes cutting through the heat, their bids punctuated by swigs from flat bottles. One woman, a pale girl from Ohio who looked barely 16, had fetched $80 for her passage. Another, a hard-faced widow who promised she could plow a field as well as any man, went for 45 and a team of mules. Tension simmered beneath the noise. It was the tension of men who had been alone too long, who saw women as a commodity, as vital as salt or ammunition. And it was the tension of the women on the bench, who stared at the boots of their bidders, their futures being decided by the weight of a coin purse. Then they brought Clara forward. She was the last. She was not like the others. The whispers started the moment Sweeney's man, a burly mule skinner, pushed her toward the platform. She was tall, but her frame was skeletal, the bones of her face sharp beneath skin that held the sallow tint of hunger. A dark, ugly bruise, the color of a dying plum, stained her left jaw and disappeared into her hairline. Her dress, a dark blue cotton, had once been fine, with lace at the cuffs, but it was ripped at the shoulder and caked with the filth of a long, hard journey. She did not look at the crowd. She stared at a spot in the dust about 3 feet in front of her. She was barely conscious, swaying on her feet. "Now this one," Sweeney boomed, trying to plaster over the visible damage. "This one is special. From back east, refined, needs a firm hand, but she'll bring a touch of class to a man's home." A voice yelled from the crowd. "Looks like someone already tried a firm hand. Sweeney, she damaged goods?" Laughter rippled, hard and cruel. "She's got spirit, is all," Sweeney countered, his smile tightening. "Needs a man to gentle her. What am I bid for this eastern flower? Let's start the bidding at $20. Just $20 for her passage." Silence. The men shuffled. They looked at the bruises, at the vacant terror in her eyes. This was not a sturdy farm wife. This was trouble. This was a woman who carried a story. And men in Sweetstone did not want stories. They wanted compliance. Clara's vision was narrowing. The voices were a dull roar, like water in a distant canyon. The sun beat on her head, a physical weight. She could smell the unwashed bodies of the men, a rank, animal smell that churned her empty stomach. She tried to hold on, to remain standing, because standing was all she had left. But the dust at her feet began to twist. The brown wall of the saloon tilted. Her knees, locked for so long, finally gave way. She did not swoon. She collapsed, a heap of bones and ruined cotton. She fell forward into the dust just as Sweeney was about to speak again. The crowd grumbled. This was poor show. A grizzled merchant named Polk, who had a stake in the freight company, shoved his way forward. He was furious. "Damn it all! She's wasting our time. She's worthless. Sheriff, Throw her in the jailhouse for vagrancy. She can break rocks to pay her debt. Sweeney kicked at her skirts. Disgusted. Get her up. But before his man could grab her, someone else moved. He came from the back of the crowd, where he had been leaning against a hitching post, watching the whole affair with flat, quiet eyes. He wore no gun belt, just a stained duster, worn boots, and a hat pulled low. He was not a big man, but he moved with a solidity that made the crowd part for him. His name was Eli McAllister. He was a cowboy who kept to himself, ran a small string of cattle up in the foothills, and was known for drinking his coffee black and his whiskey silent. He was a man with a broken past, a man who had seen the war and come back with nothing but the shadows in his eyes. He did not rush. He walked past Polk, past Sweeney, and knelt in the dust. He reached out and, with a gentleness that seemed alien to the street, he slid one arm under the woman's shoulders and the other beneath her knees. He stood, lifting her. She weighed nothing. She was a bundle of sticks. Sweeney, his face turning a blotchy red, stepped in front of him. "What in the blue hell do you think you're doing, McAllister? Put her down. She's auction property." Eli looked at him. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale and cold. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the street. It was the quietest sound anyone had ever heard, but it stopped everything. "She's not for sale." The silence that followed was absolute. A horse stamped a hoof. A tin cup clattered inside the saloon. The crowd held its breath. This was not the script. Sweeney sputtered. "The hell she ain't! She owes passage. She belongs to the company until her debt is paid. Now put her down, or my men will put you down." Two hard men, the mule skinner and another, moved to flank Sweeney. They rested their hands on the pistols at their belts. Eli McAllister did not look at them. He held the woman closer. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing shallow, a faint rasp. He looked straight at Sweeney, slowly with his free hand. He reached inside his duster. He did not pull a gun. He pulled back the lapel. Pinned to the inside of his worn vest was a small, tarnished silver badge. It was not a sheriff's star. It was older, more battered. A U.S. Army Scout badge, from a war that was more than 10 years gone but had left scars on every man present. It meant he had ridden in places that made Sweetstone look like paradise. It meant he knew how to kill and how to survive. It was a piece of a past he never spoke of, but it still held power. "I'm warning you off," Eli said. The words were flat, a statement of fact, not a threat. Sweeney looked at the badge. He looked at Eli's eyes. He saw no fear, no anger, just a deep, settled resolve. He was a businessman, and he knew a bad investment. This was not worth getting shot over. He swallowed, his bravado leaking away. "Fine," Sweeney spat, trying to save face. "Take the damaged baggage. She's your problem now. No refund." Eli turned his back on him. A final, quiet dismissal. He walked through the stunned crowd, which parted for him as if he were carrying a lit stick of dynamite. He headed toward the livery, where his small supply wagon and 2 mules were tied. He laid the woman down in the wagon bed, on a pile of canvas tarps, his movements careful, as if handling brittle glass. As he was unhitching the mules, a shadow fell over him. It was Sheriff Brody. Brody was a practical man, his face a leather map of compromises. He was chewing tobacco, and he took his time spitting a brown stream into the dust before he spoke. "Eli." Eli nodded, not looking up, his hands busy with the harness. "You know what you just bought?" Brody asked, his voice low. "Trouble," Eli said. "That's right," Brody said. "And I like a quiet town. Sweeney's a blowhard. But Polk has money, and money means friends. That woman looks like she's running from something meaner than Polk." Eli finished with the harness and finally looked at the sheriff. "She's running," Eli agreed. "Well, you harbor her. You harbor the trouble. It comes calling. Don't you bring it to my jailhouse. You're on your own." Eli, understand?" "I understand," Eli said. He climbed onto the wagon seat, picked up the reins, and clucked to the mules. The wagon lurched forward, rolling out of Sweetstone, leaving the whispers and the auction block behind. Clara awoke in pieces. The first thing she registered was the movement, a slow, jostling rock, the creak of wood and harness leather. The second was the smell, canvas, hay, dust, and the faint, clean scent of pine. The third was the fear. It clamped down on her chest, cold and sharp. Her eyes flew open. She was in a wagon bed. A man's broad back was in front of her, on the driver's seat. He was a stranger. She scrambled backward, crab walking until her back hit the hard slats of the wagon's side. The movement was a raw, animal panic, a desperate attempt to put space between herself and the man. She brought her hands up to her face, a pathetic shield. The wagon stopped. Slowly, the man turned. The late afternoon sun was low, catching the lines on his face. He was not old, maybe 30, but he looked as if he had been carved from sun-baked wood. There were scars on his left cheek, faint white lines that puckered the skin. His eyes were not the hot, hungry eyes of the men in the crowd. They were just tired. He saw her terror. He saw her, balled up like a cornered rabbit, ready to fight or bolt. He held up one hand, palm out. "Easy," he said. His voice was the same one from the street, low, rough, but steady. He did not move toward her. He kept his distance. He reached down beside his seat, not for her, but for a battered tin canteen. He uncorked it, his movements slow, deliberate. He did not hand it to her. He placed it on the wagon bed, just within her reach, but far enough that he did not have to cross the space between them. "Water," he said. Clara stared at it, her throat burning, her tongue thick as wool. The man turned away again, reaching for a saddlebag. He pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He undid it. Inside was a piece of hardtack and a strip of dried jerky. He placed this next to the canteen. "Food," he said. Then he reached behind him for his own bedroll. He untied it, took out a thick gray wool blanket, and tossed it into the back, well clear of her, where it landed in a heap. "Blanket, it'll be cold tonight." And then he did the most important thing. He turned his back to her completely. He faced forward, picked up the reins, and set the mules in motion again, as if she were not there. He gave her the dignity of his silence. He gave her space. He did not ask her name. He did not ask where she was from. He did not ask about the bruise on her face or the rips in her dress. He just drove, leaving her alone with her fear, the water, and the food. For a long time, Clara did not move. She watched his back. He was a wall. He was not the men from the auction. He was not the man she had run from. He was something else. Her stomach cramped, a violent pang of hunger that was almost as strong as the terror. Her hand trembled, but she reached for the canteen. The water was metallic and warm, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. It sluiced the dust from her throat. She drank until she coughed, then drank again. She looked at the jerky. It was tough, and her jaw ached from the bruise, but she tore at it with her teeth, chewing, swallowing. It was sustenance. It was life. The water and food hit her system, and with it, the memories she had been holding at bay crashed over her. She was not in the wagon. She was in a parlor in Denver, the curtains thick velvet, shutting out the sun. A man's voice, smooth as oiled steel. Silas Thorne. He smelled of expensive cigars and bay rum. He was a mine owner, a man who bought mountains and men, and who believed he had bought her. "You are a piece of property, my dear Clara," he had said, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, the same jaw that was now bruised. "Bought and paid for. Your father's debts are my assets, and you are my most beautiful asset." She remembered the feel of his heavy diamond ring as he gripped her hair, pulling her head back, the feeling of being owned, suffocated, displayed, the violent, possessive way he looked at her. Then, smoke, real smoke, a fire, starting in the kitchens. His shouting, the chaos, her chance. She had run with nothing but the dress she was wearing. She ran across 2 states, stealing apples from orchards, sleeping in hay barns, hiding in ditches. The cold, the hunger, the constant, gnawing fear, until 2 freighters had found her near Laramie, half-starved and broken. They said they would take her to a new town, help her find work. They had lied. They had brought her to Sweetstone. The wagon hit a rut, jolting her back to the present. The sun was gone, bleeding out behind the Wind River Mountains, leaving the sky a deep, aching purple. The air turned cold instantly, the sharp, dry cold of the high country. She pulled the wool blanket over her, huddling into its rough warmth. It smelled of him, of leather, and dust, and something faintly like wood smoke. It was the first time she had felt warm in weeks. Eli McAllister did not look back. He kept the mules moving at a steady pace. He had left the main road miles back. He was on a game trail now, winding up into the forested foothills, a place where the shadows were deep and the only sounds were the wind in the pines and the cry of a distant hawk. He stopped the wagon once, on a high ridge. He got down, not to rest, but to look back, far below. The lights of Sweetstone were tiny, angry sparks in the vast, gathering darkness. He turned his gaze forward, into the mountains. He pulled his rifle from the scabbard on his saddle, checked the load in the moonlight, and then rested the cold, heavy barrel across his lap. He kept watch over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the darkness behind them. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that the trouble was just beginning. They rode for 2 days, pushing the mules hard, climbing steadily from the flat, dusty basin into the high country. The air grew thin and cold, biting at any exposed skin. It smelled of pine resin and snowmelt. They did not speak. Eli kept his attention on the trail, which was little more than a whisper through the dense lodgepole forest, and on the vast, empty spaces behind them. Clara huddled in the wagon bed, wrapped in the wool blanket, her body a tight knot of fear and exhaustion. The steady rocking of the wagon and the cold air kept her in a state of numb suspension. She was no longer in Sweetstone, but she was not yet safe. She was nowhere. The cabin appeared at dusk on the 2nd day, tucked into a crease of the foothills so well that it seemed part of the land itself. It was not a cabin. It was a fortress, small, built of thick, dark logs chinked tight with mud and moss. It had a low roof and only 2 windows, small squares that looked more like gun ports. A thin tendril of old smoke stained the stone chimney. It was pressed against a sheer rock face on one side, with a clear view of the sloping valley below. No one could approach it unseen. Eli halted the mules and set the brake. The silence that fell was immense, broken only by the wind moving through the high pines. "We're here," he said. He got down and unhitched the team, his movements economical and practiced. He did not ask her to help, nor did he offer her a hand. He simply went about his work. Clara sat frozen in the wagon bed, staring at the small, dark structure. This was his home. It was the most isolated place she had ever seen. It could be a shelter, or it could be a tomb. He led the mules to a small lean-to, a rough stable built against the rock wall. After a few minutes, he returned and opened the cabin door. A sliver of pale light cut the gloom. He went inside, and a moment later, the warm, yellow light of a lantern bloomed in the window. He reappeared at the wagon. "You can come in. There's a fire laid." Clara climbed stiffly over the side, her legs numb, her joints aching. The ground felt unsteady. She walked to the door, her hands clenched at her sides. She paused at the threshold. Inside, it was one room, clean but severe. A stone hearth dominated one wall, with a small fire just beginning to catch. There was a rough-hewn table, 2 stools, a single cot in the corner, and shelves packed with tins and jars. A rack on the wall held his rifle and a shotgun. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and cured leather. It was aggressively male, a space built for solitude. "The cot is yours," Eli said from behind her. He was carrying his saddlebags. He dropped them near the hearth. "I'll take the floor." He gestured to a pile of folded furs in the corner. "You'll be warm enough." She nodded, unable to speak. She moved to the fire, drawn by the heat, and held out her trembling hands. He set a pot of coffee beans to grind and began moving supplies from the wagon, his presence filling the small room and then emptying it as he went in and out. He did not speak to her. He was giving her space, but in a room this small, space was a fiction. Every time he brushed past, she flinched. He made supper, a thick stew from a pot that hung on a swing arm over the fire, heavy with smoked meat and dried beans. He ladled a bowl for her and set it on the table with a piece of hard bread. He took his own plate and sat on the stool opposite her. They ate in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons on tin and the rising wind outside. The stew was hot, salty, and rich. It was the best meal she had had in months, and it brought tears to her eyes. She ate, keeping her gaze fixed on her bowl, hiding her gratitude. It felt too dangerous to be grateful. Gratitude was a debt, and she knew too well how debts were collected. When she was finished, she took her bowl to the wash basin. He said nothing. He cleaned his rifle, the rhythmic, metallic shink-shink of the cleaning rod filling the cabin. "The outhouse is 20 paces, to the left," he said to the fire. "Take the lantern. There are wolves." He laid out his bedroll, the pile of furs, on the floor near the door, a clear strategic position. He was between her and the only exit. She felt a cold prickle of her earlier fear. He was her savior, but he was also her jailer. "Good night," he said, and turned his back to her, pulling a blanket over his shoulder. Clara sat on the cot. It was softer than the wagon bed, a ticking mattress stuffed with straw, but she did not lie down. She waited. She listened to the wind shrieking around the corners of the cabin. She listened to the pop and crackle of the fire. She listened to the sound of Eli's breathing. After an hour, it deepened, becoming slow and regular. He was asleep. She waited another hour, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She had to leave. This man, Eli, he was kind in his way. He had fed her. He had not hurt her, but he had marked himself. The sheriff's words came back to her. "You're on your own." She was trouble. She was bait. The man she had run from, Silas Thorne, was a bloodhound. He would not stop. He would find her. And when he did, he would destroy this quiet man for getting in his way. She had seen what he did to men who crossed him. She could not be the cause of this man's death. She was a burden, a plague. Quietly, so quietly her stockinged feet made no sound on the wood plank floor. She stood. She looked at Eli. He was a dark shape, unmoving. The door was right there. It was not barred. She took one step, then another. Her hand was on the wooden latch, her fingers lifting it with painful care. She pulled the door open. A slice of frigid, moonlit air cut into the room. "Don't!" His voice, not from the floor, but from right beside her. She gasped and spun around. He was not in his bedroll. He was standing in the shadows by the door, where he had been waiting, wide awake, the entire time. He was just a tall, dark shape against the faint light of the embers. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have to. He'll find me. He'll hurt you." "He'll find you faster out there," Eli said. His voice was flat, devoid of pity. "You won't last the night, the cold, or the animals, or worse. You'll run right into the men he's already sent." "I can't stay here. I won't be his responsibility." She tried to push past him, a frantic, weak shove. He did not touch her. He simply shifted his body, blocking the doorway completely. He was a wall of muscle and resolve. "You're not my responsibility," he said, his voice hard. "You're a person, and I don't send people out to die. Now get back to the cot and go to sleep." "You don't understand. You don't know him." "I know his kind." He took a step toward her, into the faint moonlight. His face was grim. "And I know you're not leaving. Go to bed, girl. This argument is over." She looked at his broad shoulders, at the unyielding set of his jaw. She was trapped, defeated. She backed away from the door. A sob of pure frustration and terror broke from her throat. She stumbled to the cot, fell onto it, and buried her face in the blanket, weeping silently, her body shaking with the cold and the futility of it all. He closed the door, the heavy thud sealing her in. He returned to his bedroll. This time, he did not pretend to sleep. He sat against the wall, his rifle across his knees, and watched the fire until morning. The next days were a slow, painful education in trust. Eli did not speak of her escape attempt. He did not mention it at all. He woke, made coffee, and went outside. He was gone for hours, checking traps or tending his mules. When he was in the cabin, he occupied himself with small, practical tasks. He saw her wincing as she walked, her cheap shoes, worn thin from her escape, offering no protection. One afternoon, he took them from her. Clara flinched, thinking he meant to keep her from running again. Instead, he sat by the fire with a piece of thick leather, an awl, and heavy waxed thread. He did not speak. He just worked, his large, rough hands surprisingly deft. He cut new soles, stitched them tight, and worked tallow into the cracked leather until they were soft and waterproof. He set them by the hearth to dry, and then pushed them toward her. He fed her. He brought back 2 rabbits from his trap line, and the cabin filled with the smell of roasting meat. He made a thick, savory stew that warmed her from the inside out. He seemed to understand that her hunger was not just for food, but for safety, for substance. He fed her as if he were trying to build a new person, one strong enough to stand on her own. And he let her sit in silence. This was his greatest gift. He did not ask her questions. He did not ask her name. He did not ask about the bruise that was now fading to a sickly yellow-green. He did not ask her what she was running from. He simply existed in the same space, offering a quiet, constant presence that was, in its own way, a shield. He drank his coffee. He cleaned his rifle. He chopped wood. The rhythmic thwack of his axe outside was a steady heartbeat, a sound she came to associate with safety. Slowly, Clara began to unthaw. The terror that had kept her coiled tight began to recede, leaving a deep, bone-weary sadness, but also something else, a small, cautious curiosity. She started to help. Her hands trembled, and she knocked over a tin cup, which made her jump and apologize until he cut her off with a gruff, "It's a cup." She started stirring the stew when he was outside. She swept the floor with a broom made of bundled twigs. She refolded his blankets. They were small acts of a guest, not a prisoner. She was testing the air, testing him. He accepted her help with the same quiet indifference he showed everything else. On the 4th night, she slept. It was not the thin, watchful doze of the previous nights, but a deep, black, dreamless sleep. She woke in the gray light of dawn, disoriented, her body stiff but rested. Eli was already gone, the fire rebuilt and a pot of coffee warming on the coals. She realized it was the first time she had slept through the night in almost a year. About a week after her arrival, the small cabin began to feel cramped, the air stale with their shared, unspoken tension. Their few clothes were stiff with sweat and wood smoke. "We need to wash," Eli said, his voice rough from a morning of silence. He led her down a steep path to a creek that rushed down from the snow line, loud and clear and achingly cold. He set down a bucket and a bar of harsh lye soap. He built a small fire on the gravel bar to heat water for rinsing. Clara knelt by the water's edge, rolling up her sleeves, grateful for the clean, sharp air. Eli moved upstream, giving her privacy. She washed her dress and underthings, her hands turning red and numb in the icy water, and laid them on a sunny boulder to dry. She finished and sat back, watching the water. After a few minutes, Eli returned. He had his own bundle. He began to wash his shirt and long johns. The creek was loud, covering the sound of his movements. When she looked up, he was standing at the water's edge, stripped to the waist. Clara's breath caught. His back was to her. It was not a smooth expanse of skin. It was a map. A long, puckered scar, thick as a rope, ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs, the mark of a saber or shrapnel. Near his right shoulder was a small, neat, cratered scar, the entry point of a bullet. Other, smaller white lines crisscrossed his skin. These were not the scars of a cowboy's life. This was the mark of war. He must have felt her gaze. He tensed, his shoulders hunching, as if expecting a cry of disgust, or worse, of pity. Clara did not look away. She did not gasp. She looked at the scars, and for the first time, she truly saw him. He was not just a quiet, gruff cowboy. He was a man who had been torn apart and had somehow, painstakingly, stitched himself back together. He was scarred, just as she was. His were on the outside. He turned, slowly. His chest was just as marked. He saw her watching him, and his eyes, usually so flat, were vulnerable. She met his gaze. She held it, and then she simply turned her own gaze back to the creek, as if looking at a scarred man was the most natural thing in the world. He finished his washing, pulled on his damp, cold shirt without a word, and they walked back up the hill to the cabin. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer empty. It was full. That night the peace was broken. The cabin was dark. The fire burned down to a bed of pulsing orange embers. Clara was on her cot, hovering in the state between sleep and waking, when the sound ripped through the room. It was a shout, a raw, guttural sound of pure terror. "No, David, hold the line, hold it!" Clara bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. Eli was thrashing in his bedroll, fighting an invisible enemy. He was soaked in sweat, his face contorted in the faint orange light. "They're through!" he yelled, his voice thick with sleep and horror. "Fall back, David!" He threw himself upright, his eyes wide and blind, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He did not know where he was. He was still back there, in the blood and the smoke. Clara's first instinct was to freeze, to stay small and invisible. But the sound of his pain, a pain so deep it sounded like an animal's, cut through her fear. This was not a threat. This was a man drowning. Slowly, she got off the cot. Her bare feet were silent on the floor. She moved toward him, her hands held out, as if approaching a spooked horse. "Eli?" she said softly. He flinched, turning toward the sound, his hands coming up as if to fight. "Eli, it's me. It's Clara." She was kneeling beside him now. "You're here. You're in the cabin. You're safe." He stared through her, his breathing a harsh, ragged panting. He was still seeing the battlefield. She did something she never thought she would do. She reached out her trembling hand. She had not willingly touched a man in over a year, not since her father's cold handshake as he sold her. Her fingers brushed his cheek. His skin was hot, damp with sweat, his stubble rough. "Eli?" she whispered again, her palm settling against his jaw. The physical contact shocked him back to the present. His eyes focused. The blind terror drained away, leaving a vast, hollow exhaustion. He saw her. He saw her hand on his face, her own eyes wide with a mixture of fear and concern. He slumped, the fight going out of him. He scrubbed his hands over his face, his shoulders hunched. "God," he breathed. It was a prayer, or a curse. Clara did not pull her hand away. She left it there, a small point of contact in the darkness. They sat like that for a long time. The only sound was his breathing as it slowly returned to normal. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice a rough grate. "I didn't mean to scare you." "You were dreaming," she said. It was not a question. He nodded, staring into the embers. It's always the same. The dam of their shared silence had broken. The confessions, held back for so long, began to seep out. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice barely audible. "Clara Bellows." She finally pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around her knees. "The man I'm running from," she continued, staring at the fire. "His name is Silas Thorne. He's a mine owner in Denver, a very rich man, a very powerful man. My father owed him a great deal of money, more than he could ever repay." She swallowed, the words tasting like ash. "Silas Thorne came to our house. He saw me. He told my father he would forgive the debt. In exchange, for me, he said he was purchasing me. He believed it. He thought he bought me, like a horse or a chair." Eli said nothing, his face a hard mask in the firelight. "He kept me in his house. He was going to marry me. But it wasn't marriage. It was ownership. The way he looked at me. The way he touched me." She shivered, though the room was warm. "One night, there was a fire. It started in the kitchens. Everyone was shouting, running. He was trying to save his paintings, his money. He forgot about me. I ran out the back door, and I didn't stop. I've been running ever since." The cabin was silent again, but it was a heavy, charged silence. Eli picked up a small piece of kindling and tossed it into the embers. It caught, flaring up, illuminating the pain in his own eyes. "David was my brother," he said, his voice flat. "My younger brother, 16, he lied about his age to join up, followed me." He stared at the new flame. "It was near Shiloh. An ambush. We were holding a ridge. The Rebs came out of the trees. A full charge. They broke our line. Everyone was running." He stopped. "I didn't run. I don't know why. I wasn't brave. I got angry. Or scared. Or both. I just stood there, loading and firing, loading and firing. I didn't even know what I was hitting. When the noise stopped, I was the only one still standing on that part of the line. My brother, David, he was 10 feet away. He'd taken a bayonet." Eli's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "They called me a hero. They gave me that badge I showed Sweeney. Said I saved the regiment, but I didn't. I just got lost in the noise. A hero." He spat the word. "A hero is just a man who got his friends killed. And his brother, I hate that word." They sat there, two souls stripped bare in the firelight. They were not just a cowboy and a runaway. They were the sum of their scars, the ghosts of their pasts, the shared pain, the raw, unvarnished truth of their lives, ignited something in the small, dark room. It was a flicker of understanding, a deep, aching loneliness in one that recognized the loneliness in the other. It was a current of need, a longing to be seen. It was the first dangerous spark of desire. Eli turned to look at her. He saw the strength that had carried her across 2 states. He saw the woman who had touched his face in the middle of his terror. He saw the faint, fading bruise on her jaw, a mark of the world's cruelty. He reached out, his calloused, rough hand moving slowly. He did not touch her face. Not yet. He touched her hair, which had fallen loose from its braid. Then, his fingers traced the line of her jaw, gently, his thumb brushing over the spot where the bruise had been. "He won't touch you again, Clara," Eli whispered. His voice was thick. His thumb brushed her bottom lip. It was a touch that was almost accidental, but it sent a shock through her. It was not a touch of ownership. It was a question. Clara's breath hitched, a feeling she thought long dead, buried under layers of fear and shame, stirred in her stomach. It was a sharp, hot flicker of want. It terrified her, but it also made her feel alive. He leaned in, his eyes dark, his face blurring as he came closer. He was going to kiss her. She knew it, and she wanted it. His lips, chapped and warm, brushed hers. The contact was a lightning strike. It was too much, too soon. The memory of Silas, of his wet, proprietary kisses, of being claimed, crashed over her. She made a small, broken sound, a gasp of air, and pulled back. She didn't shove him. She just recoiled, her whole body trembling violently. She wrapped her arms around herself, a shield against him, against the feeling. "I can't," she whispered, her eyes flooding with tears of shame and frustration. "I'm sorry, I'm afraid." Eli pulled back as if he'd been burned. The desire in his eyes vanished, replaced by a deep, hollow shame. He looked down at his own hands as if they had betrayed him. "My apologies, Clara," he said. His voice was suddenly formal, cold, building the wall between them once more. "I overstepped." He stood up abruptly. Moving to the far side of the cabin, he grabbed the wood basket and began to needlessly, aggressively, add logs to the fire, stacking them with too much care. The moment was shattered. The connection was broken, leaving a raw, vibrating tension in the air that was 1,000 times worse than the silence that had come before. The morning after the kiss he had tried to take, the silence in the cabin was a physical weight. It was brittle, sharp. Clara woke on her cot to find Eli already gone, the fire rebuilt, the coffee pot cold. He had left hours before, needing the vastness of the mountains to absorb his shame. When he returned at midday, a rabbit swinging from his hand, he did not look at her. He just nodded, his face grim, and set about his work. The tension was suffocating. They were two people trapped in a box, bound by a failed act of intimacy. But survival, in the Wind River Mountains, did not wait for comfort. The cold was a constant, demanding master. There was wood to chop, water to haul, traps to check. Clara, desperate to break the awful stillness, pulled on the boots he had mended for her and followed him out into the sharp, bright cold. She stood by the woodpile, rubbing her arms, a useless, trembling shadow. Eli stopped, his axe halfway through a swing. He stared at her, not with anger, but with a deep, frustrated weariness. "What do you need, Clara?" "I need to help," she said, her voice thin in the vast quiet. I won't just sit. Show me." He looked at her thin arms, at the lingering fear in her stance. He sighed, a plume of white steam. He finished splitting the log, drove the axe head into the block, and walked past her. He returned a moment later with the smaller hatchet. He did not coddle her. He showed her how to brace the wood, how to aim, how to let the weight of the tool do the work. "Don't fight it," he said, his voice rough. "Just guide it, and watch your feet." Her first few swings were pathetic, glancing off the wood. Her hands stung, her shoulders ached, but she kept at it. She was fueled by the memory of the auction block, by the ghost of Silas Thorne, by the suffocating shame of her own fear. She would not be weak. She would not be useless. Days bled into a week, then 2. The rhythm of their lives was set by these tasks. A new, fragile comfort began to grow in the space between them. It was not the comfort of lovers, but of partners in a hard, shared existence. The failed kiss was never mentioned. It was a rock in a riverbed, and the water of their daily lives had simply found a new path around it. Clara grew stronger. The sallowness left her skin, replaced by a healthy color brought on by the cold wind and hard work. Her hands, at first blistered and raw, began to harden, callousing over. She learned to cook a hearty stew that would stick to their ribs. She learned to set a snare, her hands no longer trembling as she handled the wire. She learned to read the silence of the forest. Eli watched her change. He saw the tremor leave her hands. He saw her shoulders, once hunched in a permanent flinch, begin to straighten. She moved with a new purpose. She was still quiet, still scarred, but the haunted, vacant look was gone. She was present. One evening, by the fire, Eli was mending his duster. The thick canvas had been torn by a branch, and he was trying to stitch it closed with a heavy needle and a strand of waxed sinew. He was a scout, a trapper, a fighter, but he was no tailor. His stitches were huge, clumsy, puckering the material. He swore under his breath as he stuck his thumb with the needle for the third time, pulling it back with a sharp hiss. This thing would look better if a bear had mauled it, he grumbled, staring at the crooked, ugly seam. A sound escaped Clara's throat. It was a strange, rusty creak, a sound of disuse. He looked up, startled. She was covering her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. It was a laugh, a real, genuine, if fragile, laugh. It was the first time he had ever heard it. The sound was so unexpected, so foreign in the grim quiet of their cabin, that it shocked them both into silence. The laugh died as quickly as it had come. Clara's hand dropped from her mouth, her eyes wide, as if she had broken a sacred rule. Eli stared at her, the needle forgotten in his hand. The silence that followed was different. The tension was not gone, but it had changed. The brittle, sharp edges had been worn smooth. "Well," Eli said, his voice gruff, a faint red tint rising on his neck. "I suppose it's not my best work." She smiled, a small, tentative curving of her lips. "It's terrible, Eli." He huffed, a near laugh of his own, and went back to his stitching. The moment was a turning point, a small patch of solid ground. It was shattered 3 days later. The sound of a horse, a single rider pushing hard up the trail, sent them both into defensive motion. It was an instinct they now shared. Eli had his rifle in his hand before the rider even cleared the tree line. Clara moved to the side of the door, out of sight, her hand gripping the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. Eli stepped onto the porch, his rifle held low. "Ready." "That's far enough." The rider pulled up, his horse breathing hard, its flanks lathered. He was a young man, almost a boy, wrapped in a thick coat. He looked half frozen and terrified. "McAllister," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I am—" "Message from Sheriff Brody. He said you'd want to know. He said you're on your own, but he figured you deserved a warning." "Spit it out," Eli commanded. "He's here," the boy stammered, his eyes wide. "The man. The one who was asking about that woman from the auction. He rode into Sweetstone yesterday with 4 hired men. Name of Thorne. Silas Thorne." Clara heard the name from inside the cabin. The poker fell from her hand, clattering loudly on the stone hearth. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ice cold. He had found her. The sanctuary was broken. Eli's body went rigid. His knuckles were white on the rifle. "Go on." "He's turning the town inside out," the boy said, shivering. "He's rich, flashing money everywhere. He posted a bounty, $100, gold, for the return of his property. Clara bellows. He's got papers. McAllister says she's an indentured servant who fled her contract. Says she's a thief." "He's lying," Clara whispered, her voice a dead thing. She stepped out into the doorway, her face a mask of old terror. The boy saw her, and his eyes widened further. "Lord, it's you." "Ma'am, you best hide. He's not a good man. He pistol-whipped a freighter just for saying he hadn't seen you. Brody can't hold him. He's got the law on his side, or at least the money." "You've delivered your message," Eli said, his voice flat and deadly. "Get back to town. Tell Brody. Tell him nothing. Just go." The boy needed no further encouragement. He wheeled his horse around and scrambled back down the trail, disappearing into the pines. Clara was shaking. her gaze fixed on the spot where the rider had been. "He'll come here. He'll find me. Oh, God. Eli, he'll kill you." Eli turned and went back inside the cabin, his movements sharp, decisive. He was a scout again. The quiet homesteader was gone. He pulled a heavy canvas pack from under his cot and began filling it with ammunition, dried meat, and coffee. "He won't find us," Eli said. "We're moving. Higher up. There's an old trapper's shelter in the high rocks. We can last a month there if we have to. He can't follow. Not in this." He gestured to the sky, which had turned a flat, heavy gray. "Snow's coming." He shoved a wool blanket at her. "Pack food. Only what you can carry." Clara was frozen. "What? You can go. I'll go the other way. I'll lead them off." He stopped packing and looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen. "Don't be a fool. You won't last a day. You're coming with me. You'll be safe at the shelter. I'll leave you there and draw them off myself." No. The word was quiet, but it was solid. It was the firmest sound she had ever made. He looked at her, surprised. "No," she said again. Louder. She picked up the poker, her hand steady now. "I am not cargo. I am not a thing you leave. I am not the woman who fainted on that block. I am tired of being left. I am tired of being hidden. I am going with you, not to be left, with you, or I will walk down that mountain and meet him myself." He stared at her for a long, hard second. He saw the woman she had become, the woman who chopped wood, the woman who had laughed at his stitching, the woman who had stood in the doorway, ready to fight. He nodded, a sharp, curt motion. "Fine. Get your pack. We leave in 5 minutes." The climb was brutal. They moved fast, Eli setting a punishing pace, pushing up the game trails, avoiding any open ridge. The air grew thinner, colder. The sky pressed down, heavy and suffocating. Clara's lungs burned. Her legs were screaming, but she did not complain. She focused on the heels of Eli's boots. One step, then the next. Her jaw set. The snow began as they cleared the timberline. Small, dry flakes at first, stinging their faces. Within an hour, it was a swirling, blinding curtain of white. The wind howled, a physical shrieking force that tore at their clothes and stole their breath. The trail vanished. The world was reduced to a roaring, freezing chaos. Eli stopped, pulling her close so she could hear him. He had to shout over the wind. "We can't make the shelter. We need to find cover, now!" He grabbed her hand, his grip like a steel trap, and pulled her off the path, angling toward a dark spine of rock he knew was nearby. He was moving by memory, by the scout's instinct. The snow was knee-deep, and she fell. He hauled her up without a word and kept going. He found it, a dark slash in the rock face, barely visible through the blizzard. It was not a real cave. It was a hollow, a fissure, barely deep enough for a man to lie down, barely tall enough to kneel in. "In!" he yelled. "All the way to the back!" Clara scrambled in, dragging her pack, collapsing against the cold stone. Eli pushed in after her, blocking the entrance with his body. He unslung his pack and rifle and wedged himself into the opening, his back to the storm, shielding her. The sound of the blizzard was deafening, a constant, high-pitched scream, but inside the tiny fissure, they were out of the wind. It was dark, cramped, and freezing. The space was so small they were pressed together from shoulder to hip. They sat in the dark, their breath pluming in front of them, their bodies shaking. The cold was a living thing, seeping through their coats, through their boots. We're trapped," Clara said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "We're alive," Eli countered. "We stay here. We wait it out." Hours passed. The darkness in the cave became absolute as the snow piled up outside. The cold was getting worse. The shaking became violent. I can't feel my feet," Clara whispered. Her voice was thin, frightened. Eli's voice was grim. "We have to share warmth. It's the only way." He unrolled his bedroll, the heavy furs, with clumsy, numb fingers. "Get inside, both of us!" It was awkward, a desperate fumbling in the pitch black. They crawled into the narrow space, pulling the furs over them, their bodies pressed tight. It was a violation of the careful, chaste space they had built. It was a purely animal act of survival. His chest was hard against her back, his legs tangled with hers. She could feel his heart hammering against her spine. They lay like that, rigid, two bodies fighting off the cold. The blizzard howled. In the dark, with the wind as their only witness, the last of her walls crumbled. She was going to die here, or she was going to live. Either way, she would not die with this poison inside her. He almost did, you know," she whispered. Her voice was dead, emotionless. Eli was still, "What?" "Silas, the night I ran, the fire, it wasn't just ownership." She was shaking again, but not from the cold. "He came to my room. He was drunk. He said he was tired of waiting for the wedding. He said a man has a right to test his acquisitions." Eli's entire body went rigid. A low, dangerous sound rumbled in his chest. "I fought him," she said, her voice gaining a small, sharp edge. "I hit him with the brass candlestick. I cut his face. He was bleeding. He was so angry. He would have. But then the shouting started. The cook smelled the smoke. The fire saved me. I ran past him while he was yelling at the servants." She was crying now, silent, hot tears that froze on her cheeks. "That's why I was so afraid. When you tried to kiss me, I wanted to. God, Eli, I wanted to, but all I could feel was his hands. All I could smell was his cigar smoke. I feel broken, like he ruined me, even though he never finished. I'm soiled. I'm damaged goods, just like that man at the auction said." The cave was silent, save for her ragged, quiet sobs and the shriek of the wind. Eli lay still for a long time. She thought he had fallen asleep, or was so disgusted he could not speak. Then, slowly, he moved. He shifted, turning her in the cramped space until she was facing him. His arms, his entire body, wrapped around her. He pulled her head against his chest. His hand, calloused and rough, came up to cup the back of her head, holding her steady. He was overwhelmed. He was a man of action, of silence. This depth of pain, this kind of violation, was beyond his words, but he had to find them. His voice was a low rumble against her ear, thick with an emotion she could not name. "You are not broken. Clara, do you hear me? You are not broken." He pulled back just enough to look at her in the blackness. "He didn't break you. He didn't win. You fought. You hit him. You survived. You ran across 2 states. You learned to chop wood. You are not soiled. You are the strongest person I have ever known." He said it with such simple, absolute conviction that it cut through the shame. He held her face between his 2 big, warm hands. "You are not broken." He wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs, and then he just held her. He held her while she wept, while she released all the terror and the shame and the filth of the last year. He held her as the storm raged, a solid, warm, unmoving rock in the darkness. When her sobs finally subsided, they were left in the quiet. The shivering had stopped. They were warm, their shared heat a pocket of life in the frozen world. The desire, the spark that had been lit by the firelight and doused by her fear, returned. It was different now. It was not a flash of longing. It was a deep, slow-burning ember, fanned by confession, by acceptance, by the raw, desperate need to be alive. He touched her cheek. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, the same motion that had startled her at the cabin. But this time, she did not pull away. She leaned into his touch. She pressed her own trembling hand over his. His lips found hers in the dark. It was not a question this time. It was an answer. The kiss was slow, hesitant at first, then deepened. It was raw. It tasted of salt, of cold, of jerky and desperation and a profound, aching loneliness that was finally, blessedly, met. With slow hands and trembling breaths, they found each other. There was no grace in it. They were clumsy, tangled in furs and wool coats, in a cramped, dark hole. It was not gentle, but it was not violent. It was vulnerable. It was two scarred, broken people reaching for each other, not to take, but to affirm. It was a desperate act of life, a defiant cry against the storm and the men who were hunting them. It was a claiming, not of her, by him, but of themselves. Afterward, in the sudden, profound quiet, Clara cried again, not from pain or shame, but from release. It was a cleansing. Eli did not speak. He did not offer words that would cheapen it. He simply did what he did best. He held her. He pulled the furs tighter around them, sheltered her body with his, and held her until the trembling stopped and her breathing evened out into sleep. When Clara awoke, the world was silent. The screaming of the wind was gone. A faint, pearlescent gray light filtered into the cave. Eli was awake, watching her. His face, in the pale light, was unguarded, his eyes clear. She sat up, pulling the heavy fur around her. She felt different. She felt scoured clean, her bones reset. She crawled to the mouth of the cave. The world was gone, buried under 4 feet of pristine, untouched snow. The sky was a brilliant, sharp blue. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but it was clean. She stood at the entrance, a small, dark figure against the vast, blinding white. She was naked beneath the furs, but she was not cold. Eli moved behind her and draped his heavy duster over her shoulders. It enveloped her, smelling of him, of leather and wood smoke. She stood there for a long time, wrapped in his coat, staring into the snowy horizon. The silence of the new world was absolute. Silas Thorne was down there, somewhere, but he seemed small, distant. She was no longer running. She was here, on this mountain, with this man. She was choosing. The trek to the trapper's shelter was a silent, grinding agony. The new snow, beautiful from the cave, was a trap. It was 4 feet deep, light and powdery, offering no purchase. Every step was a battle, a high-kneed lunge that sapped their strength and soaked them in freezing sweat. Eli went first, breaking the trail, his body a human snowplow. Clara followed in his trough, her lungs on fire, her mind a numb, gray void. What had happened in the cave was a distant, impossible dream, a pocket of heat in a world that had become frozen, white, and endless. It took them a full day to cover what should have been 3 hours. They reached the shelter just as the sun, a cold, watery disk, bled out behind the peaks. It was not a cabin. It was a hovel, a lean-to of stacked rock and deadfall pine, built into a high granite cliff face. It was invisible from below, with a commanding view of the basin. It was a place for a man to hide, to watch, and to slowly go mad. Inside, it was barely larger than the cave, but it had a small, crude fireplace and a hard-packed dirt floor. It smelled of animal skins, old smoke, and bitter cold. They collapsed, too tired to speak, too tired to eat. Eli mechanically built a small, smokeless fire, while Clara just sat, huddled in the furs, staring at the flames, her body one vast, throbbing ache. They woke the next morning to a world reborn in silence. The intimacy of the cave returned, but it was changed. It was no longer desperate. It was a quiet fact. Eli moved to the shelter's small opening, his hand brushing her shoulder as he passed. It was a simple, grounding touch. He took his knife and his axe and went out, not speaking, but she knew what he was doing. She watched him from the opening. He was 100 yards away, on a small, protected ledge, working with the fluid efficiency of his scout days. He used the axe to cut young pines, trimming them, lashing them together with rope from his pack. He was building a makeshift ladder, a lookout post in the high branches of a dead snag that offered an even wider view of the valley. He was preparing for a siege. He was settling in to protect her. He would, she realized, stay here all winter, hunting for them, keeping watch, slowly losing himself to the isolation, all to keep her safe. The next few days were a strange peace. They were partners, falling into a domestic rhythm at 10,000 feet. He hunted, she cooked, he reinforced the shelter. She mended their torn clothes. At night, they lay together in the furs, their bodies pressed close for warmth. And he would talk. He told her about the high desert, about the names of the stars, about the way a wolf's track differs from a dog's. He spoke of everything except the future. But Clara was not at peace. The woman who had stood naked in his coat at the mouth of the cave was not a woman who could hide. The cold, clean air had scoured the victim from her. The man hunting her was no longer a specter. He was just a man, a rich man, a cruel man, but a man, and he was down there, in her world. On the 5th day, she was outside, scrubbing their tin plates with snow. When she said it, her voice was calm. "I am not going to hide anymore. Eli—" He stopped chopping wood. He did not turn around. "The snow will be melting in the valley. They'll be able to ride soon. We wait. We're safe here." "Safe is not the same as free," she said, her hand still in the snow. "He is down there, telling lies. He's telling them I am his property. As long as I am up here, hiding, I am letting him be right. I am still his prisoner. You are my jailer." He turned then, his face dark. "Do not say that. I am keeping you alive." "I am alive," she said, standing, her voice rising. "I fought him. I survived the cold. I survived that mountain. I am alive. Now I want to live. I cannot live up here. Eli, hiding is just a slower way to die. It's his victory." "And what is your victory?" he demanded, stepping toward her. "Walking down there. He has 4 men. He has money. He has warrants. They will shoot you, or they will bind you and drag you back to Denver. That is not a victory. That is a suicide." "It is my choice," she said. "He took my choice. You are trying to take it. I want to face him. I want to stand in that town and I want to tell the truth. I want to claim my own life." "I won't let you," he said, his voice flat. "And how will you stop me?" she asked, her eyes level with his. "Will you tie me up? Will you lock me in here? Then what is the difference between you and him?" His face went pale, as if she had struck him. He had no answer. He turned his back on her, the set of his shoulders rigid with fury and fear, and swung the axe with a violence that splintered the log in one clean shot. The argument was left there, hanging, frozen in the air between them. 2 days later, a man appeared. He was a gaunt, bearded figure on snowshoes, a string of beaver pelts on his back. He was an old trapper named Jedediah Morse, a friend of Eli's from his early days in the mountains. He was the only man alive who knew the location of this shelter. He brought jerky, tobacco, and news. "That rich fella, Thorne," Jed said, warming his hands by their fire, his eyes darting to Clara. "He's mad as a hornet. The storm trapped him in Sweetstone, and he's been drinking the saloon dry and making threats. He's doubled the bounty. Eli, $200. And he did what you was afraid of." "The judge," Eli said. It was not a question. "Aye, Judge Harlaw. Silas Thorne paid him a visit, petitioned him proper. He's got papers, signed and sealed. Says she—" he nodded at Clara. "Fled an indenture contract in Denver. Says she stole $3,000 in jewels and coin from his safe to boot. The warrant's legal. Brody can't touch him. He's got 4 hard cases with him, and the law on his side. He's claiming you—" "Girl, legal as property. And he's claiming you, Eli, for harboring a fugitive and a thief. Clara felt the blood rush from her head. Theft. It was a hanging offense. It was a lie so perfect, so complete, that it choked her. Eli stood up and walked out of the shelter. He stood on the ledge, staring down at the valley, his back to them. Jed, seeing the storm and his friend, gathered his things. "I'll be moving on. You watch yourself." "Eli, this ain't your fight." "It is now," Eli said, his voice a low growl. When Jed was gone, Eli came back inside. The small shelter was a cage. He paced, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. His face was a mask Clara had never seen before. It was not anger. It was a deep, cold, harrowing fear. "Eli?" she said. He stopped, but he wouldn't look at her. He ran a hand over his face, his fingers trembling. "When I was in Texas, after the war, I was drifting, working a cattle drive." His voice was hollow, disconnected. "There was a landowner, a man like Thorne, rich, with a private army. He had a girl, a young Mexican girl who worked in his house. He said he was drunk, in the street, and he was beating her, with his cane. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody." He clenched his fists. I said what I said at the auction. "She's not for sale." The man laughed. He said, "Everything is for sale. Yankee." And he drew on me. He was fast, but I was faster. I was just empty from the war. I shot him. I didn't think. I just did it. He was dead in the street. Clara watched him, her heart cold. "His friends," Eli whispered. "They owned the town. They owned the sheriff. They called it murder. They dragged me to a cell. They held a trial that lasted 20 minutes. The judge was his brother-in-law. They set the hanging for 2 days later. I sat there, listening to them build the gallows, and I didn't even care. I was just tired. I was ready for it to be over." He finally looked at her, his eyes haunted. "My old captain from the Scouts. He was a U.S. Marshal by then. He rode in with a federal warrant for something else. Saw my name. He got me out. An hour before the drop. An hour." He grabbed Clara by the shoulders, his grip desperate. "That's what he'll do. Clara, that's what Silas will do. He has the law. He has the money. He will make me a killer again. And this time, there is no captain coming to save me. He will hang me, and he will take you. I am afraid. I am afraid of him, and I am afraid of what I will do to him." His confession, meant to frighten her into staying, did the opposite. It set her free. She saw his trap clearly. He was bound by her past, and by his own. He was trapped between his fear of violence and his need to protect her. As long as she was with him, he was a man on a gallows, waiting. She made her decision. That night, she lay beside him, pretending to sleep, her heart a cold, hard stone. She waited until his breathing was deep, until the exhaustion of his fear had finally claimed him. Silently, she slipped from the furs. She dressed in the dark. She packed a small bundle of bread and jerky. He had been teaching her to use his spare pistol, a small .32 caliber revolver. It was in his pack. Her hand closed around the cold metal. She took it. She paused, looking at his face in the faint moonlight. She leaned down and kissed his scarred cheek, a feather-light touch. She left no note. A note would wake him. She slipped out of the shelter and into the frozen, moonlit world. She did not run. She walked. She walked down the mountain, her steps careful, sure-footed on the path she now knew by heart. She was going back to Sweetstone. The sun was high when she reached the basin. The town of Sweetstone shimmered in the distance, a dirty smudge against the snow. Her walk became a march. The fear was gone, burned out, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. Her arrival was a detonation. She walked down the main street. The mud was thick, a slurry of melted snow and filth. Men stopped talking. A prospector, his mule loaded with supplies. simply stopped in the middle of the street and stared. She was a specter, the half-dead woman from the auction block, returned from the mountains, looking like a savage. Her hair was wild. Her face was tanned by the high-altitude sun. Her dress was torn, and she was wearing a man's boots. She walked with a purpose that terrified them. Whispers followed her. "It's her. The girl McAllister took. Thorne's girl." She ignored them. She ignored the women who peeked from the windows of the Mercantile. She walked straight to the one place that held her shame, the Broken Tine Saloon. She did not go inside. She stopped, kicked the heavy mud from her boots, and turned. She stood on the bottom step of the porch, the exact spot where Sweeney had tried to sell her. She waited. The town went silent. Men came out of the saloon, wiping their mouths, drawn by the drama. Sweeney himself appeared at the door, his eyes wide. Clara took a deep breath. Her voice was not loud, but it was raw, and it carried in the thin air. "My name is Clara Bellows." Her voice shook, but she planted her feet. "You all watched. You watched me brought here. You watched a man try to sell me like a head of cattle." A few men shuffled, looking at their boots. "A man in this town, Silas Thorne, claims he owns me. He has told you I am his property. He has told you I am a thief." A voice, smooth and cold as a snake, cut across the street. "And so you are, my dear." Silas Thorne stepped out of the adjacent hotel, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He was flanked by his 4 gunmen, hard men in long dusters. He was immaculate, his suit perfect, a diamond stick pin in his cravat, the faint white scar on his cheek, the one she had given him, was livid. "Your little mountain adventure is over," he said, smiling, though his eyes were dead. "I am a patient man, but my patience has ended. Gentlemen," he gestured to his men, "kindly escort Miss Bellows to my rooms. We have a long journey back to Denver." 2 of the men started forward, their hands on their pistols, grinning. "She's not going anywhere with you, Thorne." The voice was not Clara's. It was a low, dark growl from the end of the street. Eli. He was standing by the livery, his horse lathered and breathing hard. Its reins dropped. He must have found her gone and ridden like a madman. He wasn't wearing a coat. He was in his shirt sleeves, his rifle in his hands, held loosely at his side. His face was a terrible thing to see. It was tight, dark, his eyes black with a cold, killing rage. He was the man from Shiloh. Silas laughed, a short, barking sound. "The cowboy, the hero, still playing your part. Step aside. This is a legal matter. I have a warrant from Judge Harlaw. You are interfering with an officer of the court." He pulled the paper from his pocket and waved it. "That's just a piece of paper," Eli said, his voice deadly quiet. He took 1 step forward. "You're not taking her." "Then you are a dead man," Silas said, his smile gone. He nodded to his men. "Take her. Shoot him if he moves." The 2 men advanced on Clara. Eli raised his rifle. "No!" Clara screamed. She pulled the .32 revolver from her belt, her hand shaking so violently she could barely aim it. "Get back! I'm not for sale! I was never for sale!" It happened in a heartbeat. The world exploded. The 2 men drew. Eli fired. His rifle boomed, the sound echoing off the buildings. The man on the right, his gun halfway out of his holster, was slammed backward, a hole appearing in his chest. The second man fired at Eli. The bullet kicked up dust at Eli's feet. At the same time, Eli and Clara moved, a single organism, spinning back to back, just as they had practiced in their minds. A third gunman, standing near Silas, raised his pistol to aim at Eli's exposed back. Clara, acting on pure, blind instinct, screamed and fired the revolver. The sound was a sharp pop. The man grunted, grabbing his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the ground. The 4th man, the one closest to Clara, lunged. He was not trying to shoot. He was trying to take her. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her back, using her as a shield. He pressed his pistol to her temple. "Drop it, cowboy!" he yelled, his voice panicked. "Drop it or I'll kill her!" Eli froze, his rifle up, his face a mask of pure torment. Silas Thorne, his face purple with rage, shrieked, "You worthless whore! You've cost me a fortune!" He raised his own silver-plated pistol, aiming not at Clara, but at Eli. Clara saw it all. The man holding her, Eli trapped, Silas about to fire. She did not think. She reacted. She stomped her hard-heeled boot down on the gunman's instep, driving her weight into the arch of his foot. He howled, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She drove her elbow backward, jamming it hard into his solar plexus. He grunted, the air exploding from his lungs. His pistol arm flew up. She wrenched herself free, shoving him away and falling sideways into the mud. Eli fired. The rifle's blast was deafening. The man holding her was thrown backward, his eyes wide with surprise, a red stain spreading across his shirt. He was dead. Clara stared at him, at the neat, dark hole. Her kill. In that same, frozen second, another shot rang out, but it wasn't from Silas. Sheriff Brody was standing on the porch of his office, a double-barreled shotgun in his hands. Smoke curled from one barrel. Silas Thorne screamed and spun, dropping his pistol, his right arm a mangled ruin of blood and cloth. "That's enough!" Brody's voice was a roar that commanded the street. "That's enough. Thorne! This is Wyoming, not your personal kingdom. My deputy just got a telegraph back from the U.S. Marshal in Denver. Seems you're wanted for questioning about a fire. And for bribery, you're under arrest, you son of a bitch." Two deputies ran forward and kicked Silas's pistol away, hauling him to his feet as he swore and bled in the mud. The two wounded gunmen were groaning, the street thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. The town was dead silent. Clara was on her knees. She looked at the dead man she had helped kill. She looked at Silas, defeated and screaming. She looked at Eli. He was standing, breathing hard, his rifle lowered. He was looking at her, his eyes full of a terrifying, fierce pride. The strength that had carried her down the mountain, that had made her stand on the saloon steps, that had made her fight, it all dissolved. The past year, the running, the fear, the cold, the fight, the killing, it all came crashing down on her. The world went black at the edges. She collapsed, not from hunger, not from a blow, but from the sudden, crushing, impossible weight of being free. Eli's rifle clattered into the dirt. He was moving before she even hit the ground. He caught her, scooping her up in his arms. Just as he had done that first day, he pulled her tight against his chest, his face buried in her hair, his entire body shaking from the adrenaline. He had almost lost her. He lifted her. She was not the bundle of sticks he had lifted from the dust. She was a woman, solid and real in his arms. He turned his back on the saloon, on the dead, on the wounded, and on the whispers of the town. He held her tight and carried her away from the place where she had been sold. Clara woke to the smell of lye soap and boiled coffee. She was not in the mountains. She was in a small, clean room above Sheriff Brody's office, in a narrow cot that felt strangely soft. Her body was a map of bruises. The fight in the street had left her aching, but the deep, bone-cold exhaustion of the run was gone. Eli was not there. Brody had insisted. For her safety, and for Eli's. They needed to be apart until the judge sorted the tangle. The hearing was not a trial. It was a humiliation. It was held in the back room of the Broken Tine Saloon, the only space large enough, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and sawdust. Judge Harlaw presided, a small man with a stained vest and nervous, darting eyes. He was a man who had been caught taking a bribe, and his temper was foul. Silas Thorne was there, his right arm in a thick, white sling, his face a mask of pale, controlled fury. His surviving gunmen, their wounds bandaged, stood by the door. Eli stood in the opposite corner, his arms crossed. He did not look at Clara. He just watched the judge. "The matter is simple," Harlaw said, his voice wheezing. "This man, Silas Thorne, holds a legal warrant for one Clara Bellows on charges of theft of $3,000, and for fleeing an indenture contract. He has provided papers. The fact that he was assaulted in the street while trying to serve this warrant is a separate criminal matter." "He lied," Clara said. Her voice was small, but it cut through the smoke. "You'll speak when spoken to, girl," Harlaw snapped. "She'll speak now." The voice came from the doorway. A woman entered. She was tall, plain, and wore a gray dress of sturdy wool. She was Miss Evans, the town's schoolteacher, a spinster from Massachusetts who believed in books and the law. In that order. She held a sheaf of papers. "Judge Harlaw," Miss Evans said, her voice crisp. "I find your proceedings irregular. I took the liberty, as Mr. Thorne was waving his warrants around, of sending a wire to the United States Marshal's office in Denver, the same marshal who, I am told, is already investigating Mr. Thorne for bribery and arson." Silas Thorne took a half-step forward, his face darkening. "You have no standing here, madam." "I have the truth," Miss Evans said. She looked at Clara with a brief, clear look of solidarity. "Clara Bellows is not an indentured servant. She is the daughter of Arthur Bellows, a merchant who, it is true, fell into debt to Mr. Thorne, but there is no contract of indenture. The marshal confirms it. There is only a record of sale, a private bill of sale for household goods, a transaction the marshal's office finds, and I quote, legally questionable and morally repugnant. As for the theft, Mr. Thorne's own housekeeper testified to the marshal that Mr. Thorne's safe was never opened, and the jewels he claims were stolen were worn by his mistress 2 nights after the fire. The room was silent. Judge Harlaw was sweating, his face the color of old parchment. Eli's gaze shifted from the judge to Thorne, and a slow, cold satisfaction settled in his eyes. This is slander," Thorne hissed. "It is a telegraph," Miss Evans replied, placing the papers on the table. "And here," she added, "is Clara's testimony, which I have taken the liberty of writing down. Her true papers, her baptismal certificate and her father's letters, are being retrieved from Denver. They prove who she is. This man's claim is based on lies. He did not buy a servant. He thought he had bought a woman." Harlaw looked at the papers. He looked at Silas Thorne's murderous face. He looked at Sheriff Brody, who was standing by the door, his hand resting on his shotgun. The judge made a calculation. "In light of this new information," Harlaw sputtered, "this court finds Mr. Thorne's claim of indenture and theft to be unsubstantiated. The warrant is void." He slammed his hand on the table. "Silas Thorne, you are still bound over on charges of bribery, assault, and disturbing the peace. Your bail is set at $500. Now get out of my sight." Silas stared at Clara. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a promise of future vengeance. He turned, his gunman clearing a path, and swept out of the room. Clara stood up, her legs shaking. It was over. Miss Evans touched her arm. "You are free, child. Truly free." Clara walked out of the saloon into the muddy street. Eli was waiting. He did not move to touch her. He just looked at her, his gaze heavy. The fight was won, but the war for a normal life had just begun. They were infamous. The town of Sweetstone had a new legend, and Clara and Eli were at its center. They were a scandal, a romance, and a cautionary tale, all rolled into one. Some admired them, the freighters, the prospectors, the men who lived on the hard edge of the world. Saw Eli as a man who had stood up to a rich bully. They saw Clara as a woman with sand, a woman who had shot a man to defend her own. They were offered free drinks, which Eli refused, and free meals, which Clara accepted. Others whispered, the respectable women of the town, the wives of the merchants and the ranchers, saw something else. They saw a fallen woman, a soiled dove who had lived alone with a man in the mountains, who had been the center of a gunfight. They saw a killer. They pulled their children aside when she walked by. They whispered filth behind their hands, speculating on the nature of her relationship with the quiet, scarred cowboy. They whispered that she was a curse, that she had brought death to their quiet street. Eli and Clara were bound by the fight, but isolated by the victory. They could not stay in the room above the jail, and they could not return to the high country cabin, which felt too much like a hideout. They were free, but they had no home. "The old Miller place," Eli said one evening, as they sat in the town's small, quiet eatery. "It's available. 160 acres in the valley, north of town. Good water. The cabin's rough, but the barn is sound." "The Miller place?" Clara asked. "I heard it was abandoned." "Miller died. His wife went back east. The bank took it. They're selling it cheap. $80 for the deed. It was his savings, all of it." The next day, they stood in the small, dusty land office. The clerk, a man named Peters, eyed them with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Eli counted out the money, worn coins and faded bills. Peters pushed the deed forward. "Sign here. McAllister." Eli picked up the pen, dipped it in the ink, and began to write his name. "Wait." Clara's voice was quiet. Eli stopped, his pen hovering. She looked at him, her gaze level, unwavering. "I am not a kept woman. Eli, not Silas Thorne's, not anyone's, not even yours." She reached into the bodice of her dress. It was a new dress, a simple brown calico, bought with the money Miss Evans had collected for her. She pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. "I have money," she said. "When I fled Denver, I took one thing, my mother's locket. I sold it to Miss Evans. She gave me $40 for it." She poured the coins onto the counter, half the price. "Clara," Eli started, his voice rough. "You don't have to." "I do," she said. "I pay my way, or I do not go. We are partners, or we are nothing." Eli looked at her for a long, silent moment. He saw the woman she had become, the woman who had walked down a mountain to face her demon, the woman who insisted on standing on her own feet. He nodded, a slow smile touching the corners of his mouth, a gesture so rare it made her heart ache. He pushed the deed toward her. "Then you sign first, partner." She took the pen, her hand steady, and wrote her name in clear, elegant script, Clara Bellows. Eli signed his name beneath hers. The winter of 1877 was a brutal, starving time. It came early and stayed late, choking the valley in a deep, unforgiving cold. The cabin on the Miller place was small. The chinking was rotten, and the wind found every crack. For the first 2 months, their lives were a grim, unending battle against the cold and the snow. They worked from sunup to sundown, Eli strengthening the barn, Clara re-chinking the cabin walls with a mixture of mud and straw, her hands raw and bleeding. Their only luxury, their one hope for the future, was a milk goat Eli had bought. Her name was Bess. She was a gentle, stupid creature, and Clara doted on her, feeding her precious scraps of oats, relying on the thin, warm milk she provided. One morning in deep December, Clara went to the barn. The door had been torn from one hinge. The snow inside was churned and bloody. Bess was gone. Only a few tufts of hair and a dark, frozen stain remained. A wolf. Clara sank to her knees, the empty milk pail falling from her hand. It was not just a goat. It was their food. It was their small symbol of domesticity, of a life beyond mere survival. She did not cry. She was too cold, too empty. Eli found her there. He saw the tracks, the blood. He said nothing. He just put his hand on her shoulder, then went to fetch his rifle. He spent the next 3 days in the hills, hunting. He came back, his face gray with exhaustion. 2 rabbits and a small deer slung over his back. He did not find the wolf. The loss settled over them. A new layer of cold. They were truly isolated now. In January, the real test came. Eli was checking his trap lines. A 2-day circuit in the high foothills. A storm blew in without warning. A sudden, blinding whiteout. He should have been back by noon, by dusk. He was not. Clara waited. She paced the small cabin, from the door to the window, the floorboards groaning under her feet. She kept the fire roaring, a beacon. She kept the stew hot. The wind shrieked, a living, malicious thing, rattling the new door Eli had built. She remembered the cave. She remembered the feeling of the blizzard, the suffocating cold. He stumbled in just after midnight. He was a creature made of ice, his duster frozen stiff, his beard a solid mass of frost. He fell through the doorway, collapsing onto the floor, his rifle clattering beside him. "Eli!" She was on him in a second, dragging him toward the fire. He was groaning, his words thick. "My hand, my hand." He was clutching his right hand to his chest. She pulled his glove off. It was not a hand. It was a piece of white, frozen stone. The tips of his fingers and the skin across his knuckles were a waxy, grayish black. Frostbite, his shooting hand, his working hand. A different Clara took over. The terror vanished, replaced by the same cold resolve she had felt in the Sweetstone Street. She was fierce. "Get your coat off," she commanded, her voice sharp. She used his own hunting knife to cut the frozen laces of his boots. "Now." She hauled him to the bed, piled every blanket and fur they owned on top of him. He was shaking, his teeth chattering violently. "Don't you fall asleep," she ordered. She ran outside, grabbing pans, shoving them full of clean snow. She brought them in, setting one near the fire, one far away. She did what her father had taught her, a lesson from a New England childhood. She did not use hot water. That would bring gangrene. She unwrapped his hand. It was numb. He said he could not feel it. She started with the snow, rubbing his hand, the friction agonizingly cold, trying to bring the blood back slowly. Then she put his hand in the pan of melted, cold water. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound. The pain was beginning. For hours, she worked. She slowly, so slowly, replaced the cold water with slightly warmer water, a degree at a time. The pain grew, the dead, gray flesh began to turn red. Then a dark, angry purple. The hand swelled to twice its size. Eli was pale, soaked in sweat. His jaw clenched so tight she was afraid his teeth would break. He did not complain, but quiet. Pained sounds escaped his throat. She bandaged it, gentle as she could, her heart aching with every wrap of the cloth. She fed him broth, forcing it between his lips. She sat by the cot all night, holding his good hand, watching him shiver, watching him fight the pain. He was her patient. He was her responsibility. She nursed him fiercely, protecting his hand as he had protected her life. For 2 weeks, he was useless, a man of action, trapped by his own body. He sat by the fire, his bandaged hand resting on his knee, while Clara took over. She chopped the wood. She checked the nearby snares. She hauled the water. She did his work and her own, her body aching, her temper frayed thin. Their love was real, but it was not perfect. The cabin was too small, the fear too constant. They argued. It started with small things, the friction of 2 people trapped in a box. "You're using too much firewood," he snapped one night, his voice raspy from the cot. Clara, who had just hauled the wood, dropped the logs by the hearth. "What?" "The firewood. You're burning it too fast. We're not even halfway through February. You need to bank it, not let it blaze." She turned, her face flushed with anger and exhaustion. "I am cold. The chinking is failing again. And you are not the one who chopped it. If you want to ration it, you can go out and chop it yourself." The words were cruel, and they hit their mark. He looked at his bandaged, useless hand, and his face went dark. He said nothing. The silence that followed was colder than the wind outside. They argued about the traps. He tried to tell her how to set them, how to bait them. "You're doing it wrong," he said, his frustration making him mean. "You'll catch nothing but your own foot." "Then I will catch my own foot," she retorted. "But at least I am trying, which is more than you can do." They argued about sharing. Jed, the old trapper, passed by, his face thin, his supplies low. Clara gave him a full quarter of their remaining smoked venison. When he was gone, Eli was furious. "That was our food. Clara, that was our margin. We don't know when this winter will break." "He was starving. Eli, we can't just let him die, not when we have food." "I am responsible for us," he yelled, standing, his good hand clenched. "I am responsible for you. My one job is to keep you safe, and you are giving away our food. We are not a charity. We cannot save everyone." "I am not a child you are responsible for," she shouted back, her voice breaking. "I am your partner, and I will not sit here, warm, and let a man starve to death on my doorstep. I will not become that person." He retreated, beaten by her conviction. But the anger simmered. Their love was not a soft, easy thing. It was a hard, necessary pact, forged in survival, and the edges were sharp. One night, after a long, silent day of mutual resentment, Clara woke. The cot beside her was empty. The fire was low. She heard a sound outside, the crunch of snow. Fear, cold and familiar, gripped her. She pulled on her boots and coat and went out. The moon was full, the snow a brilliant, blinding white. The cold was so intense it stole her breath. She saw him. He was leaning against the new barn wall, his back to her, his head bowed. He had his duster on, but no hat. He was holding a bottle of whiskey. He was crying. It was not a loud sound. It was a silent, racking despair, his shoulders shaking. It was the sound of a man who had held everything in until he had finally, completely, broken. She walked toward him, her feet silent in the snow. "Eli?" He did not turn. He just lifted the bottle, took a long, ragged drink, and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "You should go inside," he said, his voice thick, dead. "What is it?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. She could smell the cheap, sharp whiskey on his breath. He stared at his bandaged hand, which he held cradled against his chest. "I almost lost it. My hand. A man is his hands. Clara, a man who can't shoot, can't chop, can't build. He's nothing. He's a burden." "You are not a burden," she said softly. "I am," he insisted, his voice cracking. He turned to look at her, and his eyes, in the moonlight, were destroyed. They were the eyes of the man in the nightmare, the man at Shiloh. "I'm a man who brings death. I got my brother killed. I brought a gunfight to your new home. I can't even keep a goat safe. I can't even keep my own hands from freezing. I am a broken, useless thing." He looked away, his throat working. I never thought I would have this, a home, a woman, a life, and now I'm breaking it. I'm mean to you. I'm not the man you deserve." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I never thought I'd deserve love. And I was right." Clara looked at him, at this strong, silent man, undone by his own ghosts, by the fear of his own inadequacy. She felt a surge of love so fierce it was almost anger. She did not console him. She did not coddle him. She grabbed the whiskey bottle from his hand and threw it hard into a snowdrift. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice shaking with cold and fury. "You don't get to be the only broken one." She grabbed the front of his duster, pulling him around to face her. "You are the man who pulled me from the dust. You are the man who gave me a blanket. You are the man who listened to my shame in a dark cave and did not run. You told me I was not broken. She put her hands on his chest. Now you listen to me. Eli McAllister. You are not broken. You are scarred. You are human, and you are not a burden. You are my partner. She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, angry kiss. A kiss that tasted of whiskey and snow and a winter's worth of frustration. She kissed him with all the strength she had, forcing the life back into him. He responded, his good arm coming around her, his bandaged hand clumsy against her back. He pulled her tight, his mouth hard on hers. It was an answer, a plea. She slid her cold hands beneath his coat, beneath his shirt, pressing her palms against the warm, scarred skin of his chest. The contact was electric, a jolt of life. He shuddered, a sound of release, and deepened the kiss, lifting her off her feet, pressing her back against the rough wood of the barn. It was not like the cave. It was not like the firelight. This was urgent. This was a claiming. This was a desperate, primal need to prove they were still alive, that they had survived the cold, that they had survived their pasts. They made love right there, in the snow, against the barn, their breath pluming in the frozen air. It was a fight against death, an affirmation of their right to belong to each other. Spring came. It did not arrive gently. It came in a rush, a great, muddy thaw that turned the valley into a swamp, and then, overnight, into a field of green. The air was soft, smelling of wet earth and new pine. Eli's hand healed. It was badly scarred, the skin tight and purple over the knuckles, and he would never have the same fine control. But it was his hand. He could hold an axe. He could hold his rifle. He could hold her. Clara, her face kissed by the sun, planted seeds. She worked the small patch of earth they had cleared, her hands in the dirt, planting corn, beans, and squash. She was putting down roots, real ones. One afternoon, she came in from the garden, wiping sweat from her brow. Eli was on the porch. He had been working in the barn, the sound of his saw and hammer a steady rhythm for days. I made something, he said, his voice gruff, avoiding her eyes. He led her inside. In the corner, where a crate had been, stood a writing desk. It was made of pale pine, sanded smooth, the legs sturdy, the top level. It was simple, solid, and beautiful. Clara stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. It's not fine Eastern work, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. But the pine is good. You were always writing in that journal Miss Evans gave you, on your lap. I figured, a woman who writes deserves a proper desk. He had built it for her. He had seen her, not just as a survivor, not just as his partner, but as the woman from back east, the woman who read, the woman who wrote. He had honored the part of her that had nothing to do with him. She walked to it, her fingers tracing the smooth grain of the wood. She turned to him, her eyes shining with tears she would not shed. She did not thank him. She did not need to. She walked to him, stood on her toes, and kissed him. It was a kiss of pure, uncomplicated peace. They had survived. The seeds were in the ground. The desk was built. They were home. The high country snow melted, and the valley of the Wind River turned a shade of green so bright it hurt the eyes. Spring bled into a long, warm summer. The months passed, measured not by fear, but by the steady rhythm of work. The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a home. Clara changed. The woman who had been a creature of bone and shadow was gone. She worked in her garden, her arms bare to the sun, her skin turning a healthy, sun-kissed brown. The seeds she had planted in the cold spring soil now pushed toward the sky, the corn knee-high, the squash vines sprawling. She was no longer thin. She was strong. Her hands, calloused from the axe and the hoe, were steady. When she sat at the pine desk Eli had built her, her writing was no longer the frantic scratching of a terrified fugitive, but the clear, measured script of a woman recording her life. A quiet pride had settled in her, straightening her spine. Eli changed. 2. The haunted, restless energy of the scout had bled out of him. He still wore his past like the scars on his back, but they no longer governed him. He was grounded. He walked his land not with the wary patrol of a man expecting an ambush, but with the steady pace of a homesteader checking his fences. He was building. He added a porch to the cabin, a new, solid lean-to for the mules. His scarred hand, though stiff in the mornings, was capable. He was, for the first time since Shiloh, a man at peace. Their life was quiet, but it was not destined to be private. One morning in July, the sound of a horse being ridden too hard broke the peace. Eli was on the roof, mending shingles, and Clara was in the garden. They both tensed, the old instinct flaring. But it was not a group of men. It was a single, small figure on a winded pony. A girl, perhaps 16, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her dress torn, slid from the pony's back and collapsed near the garden fence. Clara was moving before the girl hit the ground. She ran, kneeling in the dirt, lifting the girl's head. "It's all right. You're safe." He sold her," the girl sobbed, her body shaking. "My PA, he gave her to the preacher, forgave a debt. He said she was his now, to save her soul. He took her in his wagon." Eli had climbed down from the roof, his rifle in his hand, his face grim. He saw the girl, and he saw Clara. He saw the echo of a dusty auction block. Clara's face hardened. She looked up at Eli, her gaze fierce. This was not a question. This was a statement. She helped the girl to her feet. "What is your name?" "Lottie," the girl wept. "My ma. He took my ma." "Lottie," Clara said, her voice a balm of pure, steady strength. "You are safe here. We will get your mother." She took Lottie inside, sat her at the table, and gave her a cup of water. Her movements a perfect echo of Eli's first kindness to her. But where Eli's kindness had been gruff and distant, Clara's was a fierce, immediate protection. Eli did not stop her. He rode into town. He did not go looking for the preacher, who was long gone. He went to Sheriff Brody. When he returned, he had Lottie's mother, a bruised, silent woman, riding behind him. Brody had found the preacher's wagon 5 miles outside of town and arrested him for abduction. Word spread. It moved through the basin like a grass fire. The McAllister homestead was not just a farm. It was a place a woman could go. 2 weeks later, another woman arrived. It was Sarah, one of the women from the original auction, the pale girl from Ohio. Her husband had broken her arm and left her. Clara took her in. Then came a young Shoshone woman, cast out by her white husband, with a baby on her back. Clara took her in. The small cabin was bursting. Eli, with a sigh that was half frustration and half resignation, began to build a bunkhouse. The whispers in Sweetstone, which had quieted, roared back to life. Eli McAllister, the killer cowboy, was now harboring runaways and whores. The respectable families began to call his homestead the Dove's Nest. Eli went to the general store for salt and nails. The women, in their starched bonnets, who had once given him polite nods, gathered their skirts and crossed the street. Mr. Polk, the merchant who had tried to have Clara jailed, saw him, grunted, and turned his back. A few of the ranchers, men who understood hard choices, still nodded to him. Jed, the trapper, declared it the only civilized place in the territory. But to most, Eli was cursed, a man who protected the filth, the soiled doves that threatened the sanctity of their town. Eli's jaw was perpetually tight. He hated the attention. He hated the whispers. He was a private man, but he would come home from town, his face a mask of cold anger. And he would see Clara in the yard, teaching Lottie to read, sitting with Sarah and the Shoshone woman, their heads bent together, and his anger would drain away. He was not just protecting her. He was protecting them. He had built a home, and it had become a refuge. He accepted it. In August, Sheriff Brody rode out again. He was not in a hurry. He dismounted, accepted a cup of coffee from Clara, and looked at Eli. "This is for you," he said, pulling a letter from his pocket. It was not from the telegraph office. It was a formal letter, sealed with wax, forwarded from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver. Eli looked at Clara. She took it. Her hands were steady. She recognized the seal. It was from the federal courthouse. She opened it. She read it silently, her back to the men, the paper held in the bright, unforgiving sunlight. Eli watched her, his body tense, ready for the impact. She read it twice. Her face was still. She did not cry. She did not smile. She just stood. "Clara?" Eli said, his voice rough. She turned. Her face was empty, as if a great, heavy weight had been lifted, leaving nothing behind. "Silas is dead," she said. Her voice was flat. Brody cleared his throat. "The marshal thought you should know. He was in prison, awaiting trial for the bribery and the arson. Got in a card game with some other inmates. One of them didn't like his attitude. He was stabbed, died in the prison yard. Last week. The man who had claimed her, who had hunted her, who had been a ghost at her back for over a year, was gone. A cheap, violent death in the dirt." Clara folded the letter. She looked at Eli. She looked at the cabin, at the garden, at the new bunkhouse. She looked at Lottie, who was watching from the porch, her face anxious. Clara walked to the fire pit they used for cooking in the summer. Eli followed her. She held the letter over the cold ashes. Eli struck a match. The sulphurous scratched loud in the quiet air, and held the flame to the paper. They watched it together. The edges curled, turning brown, then black. The flame consumed the ink, the official seal, the words. It consumed his name. Clara watched until the last speck of paper turned to weightless gray ash, which lifted on a small breeze and disappeared into the vast blue Wyoming sky. She said nothing. She just turned, put her hand on Eli's chest, and leaned her head against him, breathing in the smell of him, sun, sweat, and pine. He wrapped his arms around her. The past was finally, completely, gone. That summer, they held a barn dance. It was Clara's idea. The barn, Eli's pride, was finished, the high rafters smelling of fresh-cut pine. "With Silas gone," she said. "It was time to celebrate. It was time to fill their home with noise, with life." They did not invite the town of Sweetstone. They invited their community. Miss Evans, the school teacher, came, bringing a crate of apples. Jed, the trapper, came, bringing a jug of his own questionable corn whiskey. Sheriff Brody and his deputies came, leaving their guns at the door. The few ranch hands who respected Eli, young men who lived hard and lonely lives, came for the food and the rare chance of a dance. And the women of the homestead, Clara, Sarah, Lottie, and the Shoshone woman, Mary, were the hostesses. A fiddle player, an old-timer Eli knew from a cattle drive, sat on a barrel, his music fast and joyful. The barn was lit by a dozen lanterns, their yellow light warm on the new wood. Clara was a vision. She had made herself a dress from a bolt of simple white cotton. It was not a fine dress, but it was clean and bright. She wore no shoes, her bare feet moving gracefully on the smooth planked floor. She was laughing. It was not the rusty, broken sound from the cabin. It was a full, deep laugh, a sound of pure, unbridled joy. She danced with Eli. She danced with Jed. She danced with Lottie. She was the center of it all, a woman shining with her own light. Later, the music quieted. Eli, who hated being the center of attention, climbed onto a feed barrel, a tin cup of cider in his hand. The fiddler stopped. The crowd went quiet. Eli looked awkward, his scarred hand fiddling with the cup. He cleared his throat. "I'm not a man for many words," he said, his voice a low rumble. The crowd was silent. This has been a hard year, and this place has become something I never expected. You are all welcome here." He raised his cup, and his eyes found Clara's across the firelit space. She was standing by the door, her face glowing. "But I want to toast the woman who built this with me," he said, his voice thick. "A woman I met when she had nothing. A woman who taught me what it means to be strong. To the woman who wasn't for sale, but who chose me anyway." The barn erupted in cheers. The cowboys stamped their boots. Jed howled, and Miss Evans clapped, her face beaming. Clara did not move. Her eyes were locked with Eli's. And in that public moment, they were the only two people in the world. The night wound down. The guests left, their wagons rattling down the moonlit track, their voices calling out goodbyes. Jed passed out in the hayloft. Lottie and Sarah were cleaning the last of the plates, their quiet laughter drifting from the cabin. Eli stood by the great open doors of the barn, breathing in the warm night air. It smelled of sweetgrass and pine and the lingering smoke from the barbecue. He was tired, a deep, satisfied exhaustion that felt like peace. He heard her bare feet on the grass behind him. "Clara!" She came up behind him, sliding her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his scarred back. He put his good hand over hers. "It was a good night," he said, his voice quiet. "It was," she murmured. She kissed his neck, just below the ear. He tensed, a shiver running through him. She smiled against his skin. She felt his strength, the solid, grounded presence of the man who was her partner, her home. She turned him around to face her. In the moonlight, her eyes were dark, shining with a confidence and a love that was absolute. She was no longer the victim. She was no longer the survivor. She was just Clara, his Clara. She put her hands on his chest, her touch light but sure. "Take me to bed, cowboy," she whispered, her voice low and rich with promise. "I'm not fainting this time." He smiled, a slow, real smile that lit his eyes. He bent, sweeping her up into his arms, her white dress stark against the darkness, her laughter ringing out in the quiet of their valley. They lay tangled in the sheets of their bed. The windows of the little cabin were wide open, letting in the warm summer air. The night was alive with the sound of crickets, a steady, peaceful song that filled the darkness. Outside, the stars stretched from one end of the sky to the other, a brilliant, cold fire burning over their small piece of the world. They were free, scarred, and deeply in love. Thank you for listening to this story. I truly hope it brought you into their world. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please feel free to comment and say hello. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories like this one. Your thoughts mean a great deal, so please share them in English in the comments below.